Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And our first agenda item is public comment, and I have a public comment card from Mr. Ralph Hoffman. There's one.
Good evening, committee members. I'm Ralph Hoffman. I'm an applicant for this committee, and I've lived in Contra Costa County 5 more years than 2CTA was founded. And I'm a former bus ambassador for County Connection. I also used to be on the Advisory Council on Aging, and I'm currently on the Senior Mobility Action Council. And I'm glad to see you all here. I know a few of you, but I've been to this meeting, I believe, before. I used to be on the League of Women, member of the League of Women Voters also, but they wouldn't elect me to anything. Thank you.
Okay, we'll pass next to the approval of summary of actions from the March 26th meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I just would like to move approval of the comments,
All right.
actions.
Second it.
Motion by Germain, second by Bell. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
I abstain.
One abstention? Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Next business is election of chair and vice chair. So at this time, this is customarily the time of year where we elect the chair and vice chair of the committee.
Well, I think you're doing fine.
I am willing to continue serving.
I'd like to, what do I want to do? Thank you. I'd like to nominate Pamela Wagner for chair for this committee.
Point of question. Point of question. I'm sorry. And that is, what are some of the conditions in terms of the duration, in terms of, would you mind delineating some of those, Mr. Chair, prior to us nominating individuals?
I'm not aware of any conditions. Previous chairs have served 2 or 3 terms consecutively. This has been the end of my first year as chair. Okay, we have one nomination.
Well, I would like to nominate Steve to continue. If I may. I think that, as you have stated, the chairs usually have, in the past have served for 2 or 3 years, and I think it takes the first year to really figure out what's going on. So it's for that reason I think that it would be best to preserve the continuity of it. But I also do respect Pamela's. I'm not sure if Pamela would want it. Do you want to be chair?
Steve will take over. Yeah, Stephen's fine. That's good. I'm good with
So was that a second?
that. Yes.
Okay, Ms. Wagner has withdrawn her candidacy, such as it was. The only nomination is for myself. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I abstain.
May I
Thank you.
suggest somebody for the vice chair? Linda Menina, again, I'd like to have her serve as co-chair or
Vice chair.
vice chair or whatever.
Oh, yeah, we now proceed to the selection of vice chair.
I would second that nomination for Pam, vice chair.
Did I miss a motion?
Yeah, Sally made the motion too.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
I move nominations be closed at this time.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All in favor of Pamela Stewart Wagner as vice chair?
No,
Aye.
I thought that was permission. It was permission.
Well, I guess there was a nomination to close the nomination, or a motion to close the nominations. Why don't we just say, let's vote for Pam?
All in favor of Pamela as vice chair?
Let's start over.
Aye.
Opposed?
Well,
I believe Linda was nominated.
Excuse me, Chair. Excuse me, Chair. Can we do the vice chair all over again, please?
Okay, I'm sorry, I did not hear a second nomination. All right, who made the nomination for Linda?
Sally.
Oh, I thought you did it for Pamela.
Oh,
Am I misunderstanding?
I did not hear clearly. I apologize. All right, so we have one nomination for vice chair. All in favor of Linda Manina?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? All right, then Linda is selected as vice chair again for this coming year.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a motion that this committee be informed a meeting beforehand prior to elections being held, rather than coming in to a meeting and saying, okay, this is on the agenda, elections. Give us an opportunity to speak with potential candidates. So I'd like to make a motion that the committee be informed one meeting ahead of any elections.
I'll second that.
Sure.
All right, then, I'll go ahead. That I would probably just serve as direction to staff, but since we do have a motion on the floor, any debate? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passed unanimously. Okay, proceeding to general business. If each member could check their entries in the attendance log.
Chairman, I have a question on the log. I noticed last month we did not have Brian Kurselik on the roster. And today, he is on the roster, but he isn't here. Is he a member still?
You shouldn't be on the roster, I'll correct that. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further corrections to the attendance log? Not refer you to the meeting calendar. At this point, we will be meeting at our usual fourth Wednesday in June and July, and customarily, there are no meetings in August. And are there any corrections to the roster? In my entry on the roster, it should now conform to the log, attendance log, that my appointment has been extended.
Diana, on my last name for the street, can you change that from road to boulevard, please?
Any further corrections to the roster? If not, proceed to the first major discussion item, review of Contra Costa County's calendar year 2012 and 2013 Growth Management Program Compliance Checklist. And I understand we have staff from the county here. Introduce yourselves.
Good evening, committee members. My name is Jamar Stamps. I am staff in the Conservation and Development Department for Contra Costa County, here tonight to present to you our calendar year 2012-2013 Measure J compliance checklist. To my immediate right, sitting at the table, is Robert Sarmiento. He is staff at Contra Costa County as well and also worked on our checklist. Our checklist information is the same as it was submitted, exactly as it was submitted as far as what was presented to you in your packet right now. And we're here to answer any questions you may have.
On page 2.1-21, under number 10 and 11, can you explain what the difference is from the travel demand management versus transportation demand management?
Actually, they are the same thing.
That's
Those
what I was
two
wondering.
those two terms are synonymous. We just choose two different acronyms. Sorry about the confusion.
Okay. Curious.
Excuse me? I do have a question about how many sub-regional planning groups there are. I see there was an extra one added within the year. Looks like La Marinda and Tri-Valley are not together anymore.
La Marinda is actually a part of SWAT, and
Yeah, they both called SWAT, but they're presented differently.
Yeah, they operate under the same RTPC, Regional Transportation Planning Committee, which would be SWAT, as far as I understand. There's also TVTC, the Tri-Valley Transportation Council. They neighbor SWAT, and so there is some interaction there. But as far as I remember, there have been only the 5 major RTPCs in the county: West,
They don't
East,
share
Central.
much geographically.
Yeah, they are pretty close, but 2 very different areas, from what I understand.
Are they in process of being separated?
No, I think their geographic boundaries are going to remain, as far as I know.
So they meet together?
La Marinda and SWAT do. They all meet together. TVTC, which includes.
So you have one group of staff members assigned to both of them together.
The county, we attend all of the.
I shouldn't ask you this. This is about for the county.
Oh, that's okay. County staff, we do attend all of the technical advisory committee meetings for the different regional transportation planning committees. So we do have some overlap in our attendance.
In the package, you mentioned that you've spent 78, you just awarded the contract for the EBART for the Pittsburgh Bay Point area that's going through. How soon will they actually start work on the construction of that project?
That would be a question better for the Transportation Authority. They're the lead on that project.
Martin, you have any idea? Well, I know it said the contract had been written, but so do you know how soon construction starts? Yeah. Oh, okay, okay.
They built the station at the other end already.
Oh,
And there's a lot, even the parking lot is in, the bus is stopping there right now.
So, Mr. Engelman, since we have you on the floor, would you mind elaborating upon that question just a little bit in terms of when are the proposed completion date? You've probably mentioned this before, but I won't get into detail, just that one question. Since you opened the window, obviously.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, CAC members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and happy to be here to answer any questions you have regarding the authority's activities. The EBART project is, it's of course under our projects department, so I'm not the resident expert on that. So I'm going to tell you what I know from what I've seen in the paper, just like what you've seen in the paper and what I hear in the staff meetings. But the EBART project was going along on track very nicely for a while in terms of design and right-of-way. And then we ran into a snag with the contractor who was working on Highway 4. And we had originally thought that we could simultaneously have the EBART contractor in the median while the Highway 4 contractor was working on widening Highway 4. It turns out that the Highway 4 contractor would not allow EBART in. So the work on EBART has been limited. They've been working on the Antioch parking area and the station. There's some, you've probably seen some rail, some steel rails in the median there. There was an article recently that an additional contract was let for the EBART construction. And so it's been underway in bits and pieces now. They're really going to start going at it as the contractor finishes up segment 1 and 2 of Route 4. And completion is now scheduled for 2017.
Thank you very much.
Jamar, I have several questions. First of all, welcome to the CAC. In the document, you had indicated that there were 2 general plan amendments during the reporting period, the Newport Point residential subdivision and the Pantasia Space residential project, and that the land use of each of these GP growth management plan amendments changed from ag land to higher density residential. My question is whether these areas were inside or outside the urban limit line.
Both areas are inside the urban limit line. They're located in the Discovery Bay area,
Okay, so
which is entirely inside the urban limit line.
yeah, because concern here is that while you may have the urban limit line, if you change the nature of the land designation, that could obviously impact the spirit of the urban limit line, which I'm fine with that.
Certainly.
And looking at attachment C, where you included the chart for very low, for basically housing construction for all income levels, one of the things that I noticed was that in the 2007-2008 timeframe, there was a lot of very low and low income housing built, but very little, if any, I think there was like 8 units since that period of time, whereas the above moderate housing has continued to be constructed throughout the whole time period. I can understand that because of the economics of the situation, and also understand it that the county really can't build housing. But my question to you is, what do you attribute the lack of this low-income housing being constructed as opposed to the moderate housing or the above moderate housing?
Well, for the county, it primarily had to do with the dissolution of redevelopment agencies. A lot of the funding that we relied on for the construction of low-income and moderate to low housing relied on redevelopment funding. We had to transition out of redevelopment, I think back in 2000, late first decade of the 2000s. Early second decade, and that had put a big strain on our ability to accommodate low-income housing.
And do you foresee that void being replaced with anything, or is it?
Well, right now we definitely have some programs in our housing element that would allow us to better facilitate the construction of low-income housing. The funding obviously isn't going to be as robust as it once was,
Yes.
and we won't be able to execute the development of low-income housing as quickly as we would like, but we definitely have some programs in place that can hopefully take care of our housing needs in that area of the market.
Good, yeah.
And those, excuse me, I'm sorry for interrupting, but those programs are also listed in our checklist on Table C, immediately following the.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. I really like the way that you were involving Habitat for Humanity. I also like the way that that money was being spent on rehabilitation of existing housing. I think there were a lot of good projects in there, you know, and I commend you for doing that. And the status of the Newtown project, is that still going forward, or is that?
You're referring to the New Farm project?
New Farm, yeah, New Farm, I knew it was right.
So, yes, the New Farm project is still going, but it has been, it's been revised. It's been scaled back a little bit, so it's not actually called the New Farm project anymore. It's called the Tassajara Parks project. In the same location with less housing density. We just released today, actually, the notice of preparation and notice of scoping meeting for a draft environmental impact report. And I believe a copy of that has been sent to the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So as soon as it's been received here, I'm sure they would be able to forward it to the entire committee for your review. But in that notice of preparation, we do indicate the areas of environmental analysis that we intend to undertake going through the EIR process.
Now, I know that the old New Farm project, I mean, there was a lot of controversy about that because the area in question was outside the urban limit line, but yet there was going to be an urban potential. Well, I guess I can qualify it as urban development there, you know, or potential density changes. You know, my comment here is the fact that, like I said earlier, I think that when you do change the land designations outside the urban limit line, that could be a potential violation of both the legal and spirit of what Measure J wants. I think that, you know, that has to be considered and going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That is something that the county will have to consider going forward. The great thing about this is that right now there's just, we're in the process. We haven't made any decisions. We're reviewing the project, and there will be a lot of vetting about the merits of this project as we continue forward.
Yeah.
And that is going to be one of the primary considerations.
Yeah, and finally, going, you know, I was made aware that there were documents from the last time we approved you where there was some question about the compliance of your growth management element, where it was passed conditionally that there would be, I guess it had to do with obsolete Measure C provisions in the general plan. Has that been addressed?
Yes, sir, that has been addressed during the last checklist cycle, the calendar year 2010-2011 checklist cycle. We worked with Contra Costa Transportation Authority staff to put together a correspondence table, which I believe is also in the packet, that basically shows where in our current growth management element we comply with the new model growth management element. That was accepted by the Contra Costa Transportation Authority Board last year, and we then received our return of source fund payments. A part of that process includes the county incorporating that correspondence table into our growth management element so that we can have that perpetual reference. The way that we're going to do that is through our housing element update. Right now, we are in that process, which began last year in October, and anticipate a draft housing element as well as the inclusion of the correspondence table. We anticipate a draft of that being made available by this summer. So we are continuing that process and continuing to comply with the Transportation Authority's conditions.
Weren't you also supposed to add the sheriff and the parks divisions inside the growth management plan?
Our growth management element does list provisions for sheriffs and parks facilities. We've always had that in there.
You did that.
Yeah.
I think the correspondence table represented a lot of hard work. I appreciated it, but I can't understand the codes you put in the second column.
Yeah, so the first column, if my memory serves me, are the, forgive me, it's been a while since I've seen
model.
it, but it's the model growth management element, and then immediately across would be the policies in our general plan that that
Yep.
comply with that, or that are similar or the same to that language.
Martin, could you comment from the staff's point of view, the requirements of the last checklist updates to the growth management element? Are you satisfied with those, or is there still some issues?
Good evening, Martin Engelman once again. And we are looking back at the last checklist cycle to make sure that there are no outstanding issues. And I think I still need to confer with county staff on the timing of that housing element update. And we may ask for another status report from the county as we take this to the authority for review and approval. But I believe that the last cycle, the county board directed their staff to use that correspondence table whenever approving new projects or reviewing project submittals or proposals, and so they're doing that. And then at some point, this was to be incorporated formally into the GME, and as Jamar said, it's part of the housing element update. But I haven't been updated on the schedule for that housing element update, and I guess that's where we need to kind of get back up to speed on all this.
So is there a need for the CAC to address that matter, or is it just something that we, like if we were to recommend approval of this checklist, would it be?
Well, if you recommend approval, I'd just suggest you recommend approval subject to clarification of the GME requirements, and that with the understanding that would be taken care of in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. All right. So we should put it, when we do if we do recommend approval, I think that's something the CAC should strongly consider, is recommend approval with the understanding that the GME issues would be resolved between county staff and transportation authority staff. Okay. That's all I had.
David, I have a question also about the general plan amendments out in Discovery Bay area. I'm trying to interpret it to how many units they represent, and have they been built yet?
I can answer your second question first. No, they haven't been built yet, but I think the units are listed. Excuse me just a moment.
I don't even see an acreage, do I?
Okay, my apologies. It doesn't look like they are, but I know that I have a rough idea off the top of my head. The Newport Point residential subdivision, I believe, is about 70 units, and the Pantages Bays residential project is about 242 units.
242 for Pantages?
I believe so, yes.
And what for the Newport one?
Newport Point, I think, is around 70. It's definitely under 100.
17?
70.
Oh,
70.
70. Wow, that's more than I expected.
An additional question, Mr. Chair. Anytime I see the words mitigation and fair share in the same paragraph or within the same context, I get a little bit nervous from a public policy standpoint and clarification. So with that being said, would you mind two things? Number one, clarifying page 2.1-6 as relates to the consequences of the negative action, and then move over to 2.1-7 and would you mind tying those together as it relates to your proposal in terms of this particular checklist? I have some concern in terms of the mainly the allocation of the funds and return of funds in the context of mitigation and fair share.
Yeah, I'd be happy to
question.
try to answer that as best I could. Unfortunately, I don't have the authority packet in front of me. Could you tell me what page on the checklist that is?
Yes, the first is 2.1-6. There's consequences of negative action.
I don't think we have a reference.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I know, I mean, there's what he has.
I just want just a clarification, that's all. I'm just not certain as to how to relate to the
Oh,
mitigation.
I see. Okay, so
program.
this is
Yes.
you're referring to the board order from Contra
Yes.
Costa County.
Would you mind explaining it? Yes. a little
This
bit.
is just a standard for all of our staff reports to the Board of Supervisors. We're required to address this question: how any action taken before the Board
Understand.
of Supervisors can lead to any negative consequences. So this is just something standard that we put together. And the language in there, failure to adopt the CIP for Parks and Sheriffs and approve the checklist, would prevent the county from being able to receive their return to source funds, our share of the sales tax money that goes towards local streets and roads maintenance.
Okay.
This is just for the county, though.
I understand this from a bullet point standpoint. Okay, now would you move over to the next page, 2.1-7, transportation mitigation programs. That checklist you have under letter A, please, 2A.
So we have adopted and implemented local development mitigation programs as required by Measure J. So when development occurs, that development is supposed to be able to fund their share of the mitigation for transportation impacts from that project. And that's
You
something
mean their share, you're referencing private developers? Not
Yes.
necessarily other, either government or quasi-governmental entities?
that, as far as I know, it's any entitlement that's issued by our jurisdiction. They're required to comply with this policy.
Yeah, the language from this comes
Okay.
from Measure J, and the checklist here is pretty much a boilerplate checklist that all jurisdictions have to comply with, and this was something that was goes all the way back to Measure C, was that every jurisdiction was supposed to come up with mitigation fees that would try to make sure that any new growth was being mitigated, the transportation was being mitigated. So this is something that has been carried over, probably has outlived its usefulness, but it's just something that's been pretty standard boilerplate. Boilerplate.
I think in the future, we probably need to look at other alternatives. I mean, it's very tough for businesses, I mean, developers, everyone else. And I think that's something that should be addressed in the future, just from a pure public policy standpoint, in terms of, I mean, if you keep looking at developer fees and such, we need to look, it's just, like the gentleman mentioned, this has been on the books for quite some time. I think it's time to review this in terms of this real application and the utilization of it.
Yeah, I think there's actually a requirement in the state law that developer impact fees are reviewed every few years or so. I can't remember what the statute says, but each RTPC, Regional Transportation Planning Committee, that has a development impact fee program does periodically review their fee structure. The county does it as well for our local development impact fees. That's sort of on the side of this, but still kind of in the same ballpark. So there is a statutory requirement to review those fees after so many years.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, too.
I'd like another question.
Sure.
Under the different areas, like take, for instance, the West County area, where we're talking about I-80 and San Pablo Dam interchange. It's just an example, but so many of the activities listed in the far left column, then you look over to the schedule to achieve, the date has already passed. Does that mean everything's been done? Which I doubt.
So the way that we constructed these tables were to show on the far left column all of the actions that are in the action plan for whatever RTPC the table is showing. So in this case, WCTAC, West Contra Costa Transportation Advisory Committee, all of the actions that that subregion has to take to implement their projects.
Yes,
Are
I know you're
listed
not
on the left.
responsible for getting it done, but
We solely are not, the county is not, but we as a subregion, that includes Pinole, Richmond, San Pablo, et cetera, are responsible. So some of these actions will not have any implementation status next to them. That's because either the action was completed or we just haven't had the funding to do
where
something.
you see the columns is scheduled to achieve. What is
Yes.
that supposed to, what is that telling us?
So it's basically saying when that action plan has designated that particular action to be completed.
Do they ever update them?
They do, yes. Action plans do go through updates periodically.
I've just never noticed it before.
So I should probably also mention that these are from the previous action plan for the West County area, and they just underwent an action plan update. Those actions and schedule to achieve dates are not in this table. So we submitted this before their action plan was completed this
Well, I'd like
this
to
year.
have it updated occasionally. Thank you.
Certainly.
Yeah, that San Pablo Dam Road project fell off a cliff called no money.
Well, just to carry on about San Pablo Dam, that whole area between Orinda and Richmond seems to be undergoing a lot of growth. Is it hopeful or is it happening?
There isn't a lot of unincorporated area between the two cities you just mentioned, so I would hate to speculate. Those may be better questions for the staff from those particular jurisdictions. But as far as the unincorporated county goes, we don't have a tremendous amount of growth in those areas. They're largely urbanized and pretty well built out. Exactly. Yeah, El Sobrante, we definitely don't have a lot of projects a lot of subdivisions, a lot of growth in those areas. They kind of are built out as they are. So, yeah, for the unincorporated county, it's not much.
On page 2158, I believe these are summary of county level programs. I noticed that code enforcement in the 2012 underwent a 50% staff reduction and rental inspection was suspended completely. Is there any indication that that situation will improve?
Yes, it is actually improving now. The county has lifted the hiring freeze, and we're continuing to hire more employees, and our code enforcement and weatherization divisions are growing as we speak.
Well, Chair, there doesn't seem to be any other questions, so I would like to make a motion that well, actually, I'm going to allow I guess there's no county representative here, is there?
No, there's not.
Okay. Well, then I'll take recommend a motion that we recommend approval of the county's growth management compliance checklist with the understanding that the issues with the growth management element in the county's general plan be resolved between the county staff and the authority staff.
I second the motion.
Second by Wagner.
Yes.
Any further discussion?
Yes. In terms of being resolved, and those type of phrases are pretty interesting. I think when it mentioned resolve, make sure it's resolved in a written manner. I mean, in terms of that is documented and measurable, that we can actually, if we were to ask the question again and you guys get it resolved, I want any type of subjective response, make sure something is documented. That's all. No other questions. Thank you very much.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jamar.
Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chair, before we move on to the next agenda item, this is the new cycle for the growth management checklist, and county always is number one to do that. And side comment here is that I still don't understand why jurisdictions wait to the very last minute to get them in, because there's money sitting on that table that they can just get by doing this. So my recommendation is for any of the members here to go back to their jurisdictions and sort of put a prod in whoever the planning department is that does this, because, I'm sure every jurisdiction can use the money. But the second item I want to address here is that we have had a growth management subcommittee in the past, and I'm really not sure how active that is. I tried, to coordinate this with emails, and I really haven't gotten that many responses from the members of the growth management subcommittee. So I would like to say that we review the need for a subcommittee, and if we do, to select members that will participate. So I don't know whether you want to discuss that now or put that on another agenda item for in the future, but
I'd like to comment. I'm a member of that old committee that you don't hear from, because I have to read through the whole thing before I sum up my questions. And by that time, we're having a meeting. I just can't seem to state what I need to know.
Well, I think your comment is, in the past, the subcommittee has gotten the checklist in advance to where we used to be able to hold meetings, like 2 weeks before the CAC meeting, and really we used to go into the conference room where we had all of the old documents and things like that.
Well, I have to admit I've been very busy this weekend.
Well, I think I have been too, but I'm just referring to, in the past, like the last cycle, it was still not there. So maybe one of the issues is that we're not getting the checklist in a timely manner to have discussions. But nevertheless, I still find that the participation was not what I was hoping for.
Martin, do you have anything to say from a staff standpoint as to getting checklists out early to the committee?
Yeah. Well, this is the first one of the cycle, so we're just getting started here, and there are 20 of these that come through. They all look the same. I think as you become more familiar with the checklist, what it looks like, what the contents are, it'll take you less time to review them. But what I could offer to you is that for this particular reporting cycle, which is the 2012-2013 calendar years, we're not expecting a whole lot of issues here because all the jurisdictions got their growth management element adopted the last time around. That was the big push to fully get into Measure J and to get rid of Measure C. They had to get their growth management elements adopted. And with the exception of the counties we just discussed, that's been accomplished. So we're not expecting a whole lot of controversy or issues regarding the checklists, but there's always, a possibility of issues with the housing and the housing report. There's the Pittsburgh issue is finished with. Pittsburgh, as you recall, was we were withholding their funds while they were for non-participation in the regional mitigation program. So we just don't see a whole lot of controversy. I think you could safely put the growth management subcommittee in a holding pattern, and we just go directly to the CAC board, and then if there are issues, you could talk about them here.
Yeah, one of the advantages of the subcommittee, and I'm not advocating that we maintain it, was that because of the Brown Act, it does prohibit the discussion of issues pending on the agenda. But the subcommittee being not a quorum of the full CAC, allowed introspection as to, the discussion amongst members that were clearly designated, so that there could be more quality of analysis. So my concern too, and I do agree with Martin, I don't think there's going to be any issues coming up in the future. But the subcommittee, as loose as it is, does give a forum where there can be members who can discuss issues without the fear of violating the Brown Act. And that's the only advantage I see of this subcommittee at this point.
Well, I know that I've found it helpful that a subcommittee gets a more in-depth look at this prior to the meeting. What I might suggest is if we can find ways and means to make information available to the subcommittee prior to mailing out of the formal agenda. One possibility would be to put it somewhere in the documents area of the website other than the formal agenda area and send the subcommittee members an email pointer to that. So if we can facilitate this process, I think it would help. With the, that being said, would the committee be willing to place the final determination on what we do about this as an agenda item at our next meeting? Give us all time to think about it.
Sure.
All right. I'll so ask staff to do that.
Chair, I have a comment. I have to agree with Dave, that as a subcommittee, the opportunity to view the checklists prior to coming to a CAC meeting saves time. That's number one. Number two, gives whoever sits on that committee an opportunity to actually get more in-depth knowledge of how this process works. I've sat on that committee, and there have been several issues with work that just don't allow me to be as active as I'd like to. And just because there may not be some issues that are difficult down the horizon, I think that this subcommittee really should stay in place, and to look at perhaps other members of this committee who will then want to utilize this slow period, if you will, to learn a little bit more. I thought that Dave was excellent in raising issues and pointing to items that we really need to look at. And I know that I took his lead on some of the documents that came before this committee. So I would very much like to at least see this committee stay in place. And I would like you to consider that.
All right, then we will take up this at our next meeting and come to a final determination on the subcommittee. And if staff could give some thought to ways and means without adding to the dead trees and impacting staff too heavily, of at least giving the subcommittee members a chance to look at the information a little bit prior to the formal release of the agenda and its mailing. Appreciate it. We can discuss this next meeting.
I get a couple. Sorry, I have a comment too. With respect to the committee, if we have the information, I would like to see the frequency that excuse me, that it met, and the attendance per number of members who were assigned to it or joined the committee, and what the frequency of the membership attendance of those. Because if there was just Dave attending the meeting, what's the point? Okay?
Well taken, good point. Mr. Chair, I think what the gentleman is saying that, Diane, when we come back next time, is that we have some structure. If we're already going to do a meeting, a subcommittee, there's some structure. And just like there are to this body, any other ad hoc body or a select committee in this particular case, I think there's some structure in terms of the meeting, the minutes, and all that such. I think that'd be very, very helpful, very helpful.
I have a comment, and also, I don't think I need it, but
You need it for the tape.
thought I was loud enough. Since I joined, I'd heard about this committee, but I'd never seen any results of any of the meetings. So if we do have that, it would be nice for all the members to get the minutes of that particular meeting.
Well, I should state that there really aren't any meetings. We've, in the past, before we relied on computers so much, we did actually meet as a subcommittee in the authorities' offices. But in the past, we have just been doing emails. And what you actually see is the compilation when we come up with questions. That is pretty much what we have resolved to ask the questions. So if you're expecting minutes, there aren't any.
But I think just from a public policy standpoint, there has to be some documentation of something transpiring. I think that's what they're wanting. There's something transpiring. And I think when we start going to specifically emails and such, it could be some potential issues there, just from a legal aspect. And so I think we should, again, discuss this in detail. Perhaps there may or may not be a need for this, but nonetheless, if we do decide to do this, I think we should do it the proper way and keep a full disclosure.
The documentation are the questions that we send to Martin, which then come to this committee and are asked, and Dave then fields those questions to the representatives. So that's the documentation, or the email questions that we have about the particular checklist.
And I should also add here, as far as the adherence to the Brown Act, this is an advisory committee. We do not make any decisions that impact any jurisdiction. We only make the recommendations. So the requirements of documents really don't apply here as they would for, like, the authority. And so I think that you're trying to add layers of bureaucracy that are not necessary.
I do understand what you're saying, but I think what I'm trying to do is be inclusive and be very transparent. When you're dealing with any public policy, transparency is paramount. I'm just saying let's be as transparent as possible. That's all I'm saying. I'm not for creating any more bureaucracy that's needed. I'm definitely an anti-bureaucracy in terms of expansion-wise. But I think just from transparency side-wise, we need to be as transparent and as inclusive as possible. That's all.
All right, well, let's take this up. And it is true, the point I was going to make, we are not a policy-setting committee and are therefore not subject to some of the strictest requirements of the Brown Act, especially in terms of subcommittees, et cetera. But we will hopefully discuss this and resolve it at our next meeting. So I'd like to proceed to item 2.2 on the agenda, the draft action plans and countywide transportation project, comprehensive transportation project listing for the draft CTP update. Martin?
All right, perfect timing. You were just mentioning, Sally, about the update of the action plans, and the action plans are being updated as we speak. So I'm here tonight to just give you an update on the overall effort to update our countywide transportation plan, and tell you about the action plans for routes of regional significance, and introduce you to a new acronym, the CTPL, which is the Countywide Transportation Project List. So all of those things are are in play right now. The countywide transportation plan is a document. It's a planning document that looks out 30 years into the future and asks the question, what will our transportation system look like in 30 years from now? So in this case, the horizon is 2040. And from the authority's standpoint, what projects do they need to build? What actions do they need to take? What measures do they wish to adopt to help deliver an efficient transportation system to the people and areas of Contra Costa? So we are proceeding with a countywide transportation plan update, basically on this schedule. That is, the draft will be issued in July of 2014, and the final will be adopted in December of 2014. And the countywide plan, when it's adopted, should have in it every project and program under the sun that anybody can think of, and we're expecting to have a significant public outreach effort that goes along with the development of the plan and taking it to the final approval. And then after the end of 2014, we're actually going to move into the development of a transportation expenditure plan, what we're calling a TEP, TIP. And the transportation expenditure plan would provide an advocacy document for future funding through new sources, including the possibility of a Measure J sales tax renewal or extension that would go on the ballot in November of 2016. So that's kind of the overall schedule. If you look at your packet on page 2.2-5, you can see the proposed outline for the countywide plan. It's kind of a scaled-down version of our previous plan, which was 8 chapters. We're going down to now 5 chapters. There's an executive summary, an introduction that includes looking ahead at the forecasts for traffic in 2030, our vision, goals, and strategies, which we've been refining and we discussed with you over the past 6 months, an overview of the transportation system, the roadways, the transit network, the HOV facilities, the bike ped network, and the facilities for goods movement. A discussion about cooperative planning, which incorporates the 5 action plans developed by the Regional Transportation Planning Committees, West, Central, East, Lomond, and Tri-Valley, and then discussion of the growth management program and the requirements of that. And finally, implementation. What does the authority need to do to implement the plan? And this is usually where we talk about what future tasks there are that need to be accomplished. And one example of the previous plan, the 2009 plan, included a implementation task that we develop a study of sustainability and how sustainability can be incorporated into our decision-making process as we implement Measure J, and that was also to reflect more the regional effort to develop a sustainable community strategy and the requirement now that we identify places where there'll be a lot of transit usage and where people can live and work and use transit more conveniently in the future than they can today. The document is 3 volumes, and Volume 1 is the body of the plan, Volume 2 is the CTPL, and Volume 3 are the detailed action plans for routes of regional significance. I did bring this map. It's a little bit small, but it shows in red the designated routes of regional significance, and you're welcome to get up and take a look at it close up if you'd like. But essentially, it's all of the freeways, and most of the major arterials are designated as routes of regional significance. And really what that means is that instead of one city worrying about the roads within the city, a route of regional significance obviously has a lot of through traffic. It connects different parts of the county. It may lead to a major transportation hub or entertainment center. And so it takes more than one city to address the issues on a route of regional significance. So we ask that the regional transportation planning committees be responsible for designating routes of regional significance and then developing performance measures for them and then developing a plan on how they can best accomplish those performance measures. So the action plans are kind of the starting point for the countywide plan. Each regional transportation planning committee develops an action plan for routes of regional significance. They then forward it to the authority. The authority kind of knits them all together. So we connect the West County to the Central and the Central to the East and the SWAT to the Central and East. And then the authority takes a look at from a countywide perspective and tries to determine whether or not there are any major issues that need to be addressed, and then what actions need to be taken from a countywide perspective. And just to give you an example of some of the major issues in the past, there used to be a huge issue about traffic from East County coming into Central County, and the congestion it caused, of course, is still an issue. But the big issue was that traffic wasn't using Highway 4 and that it was instead using the railroad, Kirka Pass, Ignacio Valley Road, cut through, and Bailey Road. So as a result of that, we funded and undertook the East Central Traffic Management Study, which resulted actually in a plan that is now in place, which involves metering the traffic on the surface streets from East County to Central County, and that metering is timed with the expansion of Highway 4 so that as Highway 4 gets widened further and further to the east, we encourage more and more of that traffic to stay up on Highway 4 and use the freeway to get into Central County rather than the surface streets. Of course, Central County doesn't especially like their surface streets being flooded with East County traffic, so that's kind of where that came from. So the action plans, I have a very quick PowerPoint here to tell you about the action plans. And the action plans are now pretty much in draft stages, and they've been forwarded to the authority for incorporation into the draft countywide plan. There's a couple of issues that we're talking about committee to committee that I'll discuss briefly. Here's what an action plan is comprised of. It has a statement of vision, goals, and policies. It identifies routes of regional significance. It has what are called MTSOs, multimodal transportation service objectives, and then implementation actions, measures, and programs for achieving those objectives. And it includes a part about how local jurisdictions' development proposals will be reviewed at the regional level, and it includes a requirement for the mitigation fee program or the regional transportation mitigation program, which was mentioned earlier. So at this point, all the draft action plans have been distributed for review by to the other RTPCs. So West has looked at Central, Central's looked at East, and the regional committees have approved use of those plans in the CTP. So we're really pretty far along here in terms of getting the pieces of the plan on the table. And these 5 action plans, I should tell you, Volume 3 is about 2.5, 3 inches thick. Each action plan is a good ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch thick in terms of paper. So we're we're in good shape there. We're going to carry those forward into the countywide plan, into Volume 3. And then the authority is going to run the action plans through the environmental review process, and that will bring us to, when we have the final plans ready, the regional committees can adopt their final plans. In November, as shown here, there could be some changes based upon inter-sub-area discussions. Some key features of the 2014 action plans: they're taking more of a multimodal approach. This is partly in response to Senate Bill 375, which kind of changed the way we're thinking at the regional level. There's more consideration of transit, bicycling, and walking. There's concern about trips within the sub-area. Intra-regional routes have been identified, and the impact of traffic diverting from the interregional system to the intra-regional routes. There's increased support for freeway management strategies as we start to kind of build out on our freeways. You can't add any more lanes, so you really have to think about how we're going to make the best use of what we have. And then kind of a new focus on BART as look into BART for important interregional strategies, especially the C line going through La Miranda and East County. So some of the topics that we've been discussing, RTPC to RTPC, is in East County we have a project called TriLink, which I think you've heard about, SRT 39, which would connect Brentwood to Tracy. It's a new freeway that's proposed, certainly not funded, but it's been identified by the legislature. It has yet to be adopted by CTC, but we have to work with our friends in Alameda County to make sure that they're comfortable with where we're going with the TriLink proposal. And the East County plan, I think, fully embraces SR 239. The TVTC plan, they're a little more tentative about it because they're concerned about impacts in eastern Alameda County. Everybody wants to improve Vasco Road, but if you talk to Tri-Valley jurisdictions, they're looking at the safety improvements. They don't actually want to improve the capacity of Vasco Road, and many East County residents would love to see Vasco Road widened so it could get them down to 580 quicker. And of course, the residents of Livermore are concerned about if all those residents come down and use up the space on 580, there'll be no place left for the traffic that's coming from Livermore. So Vasco Road is kind of another East TVTC discussion item. For I-680, there's discussion now of adding a express lane or a hot lane to I-680, so we need to talk about that with Transpac and La Miranda and Tri-Valley. Probably we're looking at a corridor study there to figure out how best to operate I-680, and also there's continued discussion about a BART connection from Walnut Creek to Dublin, but there's no place to put it. And so really probably even looking out to the year 2040, the best we could probably do is some kind of a transit service that uses the I-680 corridor, and maybe it's an exclusive bus lane, but we're certainly not going to see any kind of rail down the I-680 corridor or rail down the Iron Horse Trail at this point. It's not in our vision. Pleasant Hill Road, traffic from Martinez and Pleasant Hill comes down Pleasant Hill Road. A lot of that traffic stays on I-680, but a lot of it ends up on Pleasant Hill Road. And as the I-680-24 interchange has started to congest, we've seen that the traffic on Pleasant Hill Road is kind of back up to where it used to be before the 680-24 freeway was improved. So there's discussion between Central County and Lafayette, basically, on how to operate Pleasant Hill Road, and there may be further discussion about that. Bailey Road was designated as a route of regional significance in East County, but not in Central County. And with this action plan, actually now Central County has agreed that Bailey Road should be a route of regional significance. So it now finally connects between Highway 4 and Treat Boulevard, and it goes through the Concord Naval Weapons Station. BART is, it's always been on the map, of course, but it's never really been called a route of regional significance. And one of the ideas that La Miranda came up with is that they should call it a route of regional significance. So we're discussing that. That would mean that La Miranda would set objectives, performance objectives for BART, and then actions, measures, and programs for achieving those objectives. But since none of the cities own BART or can build projects on BART, that becomes an issue. Similarly, the Iron Horse Trail, which is owned by East Bay Regional Parks, there's a proposal from the Tri-Valley that they designate that as a route of regional significance. So this is kind of an effort to make the network a little more multimodal and reduce the highway emphasis. So we'll be talking about that. So that concludes my discussion of the action plans. And there's one last thing I want to talk about, and that's the comprehensive transportation project list, which I think there are over 1,200 projects in that database now, and they total about $11 billion, of which we have less than half of that for funding in the next 30 years. And there's also programs which total $14 billion. Did I say million? Okay, so billion. These are billions, 11 billion and 14 billion. So rounded out, 25 billion in projects and programs between now and 2040 for Contra Costa County. In order for a project to get on the list, it has to have a project sponsor and a cost estimate. So a citizen actually can't get a project on the list unless they take it to an organization that then supports it, and then it gets on the list. And there are a lot of little projects out there that were pretty much rolled up into programs or rolled up into one line item, like fixing potholes on local streets is one line item. So we start with this, if you look at the project list, we start with this $11 billion project list, and we're going to go ahead and when we release the draft 2014 CTP, we're going to have a public outreach effort to ask the public, did we miss anything? Is everything that you're dreaming of in this plan? We want to make sure that we're getting our arms around the whole picture of all the transportation needs and requirements that people think we need within reason. I mean, we're not going to double deck Ignacio Valley Road or anything like that, but what do we need, to get through the next 30 years? So, and once we have that, then the authority will go ahead and adopt the plan, and then we're going to go through this narrowing process where you try to go from $11 billion down to, say, $5 billion, and say, okay, here's $5 billion in new projects, and from there you can start to create an advocacy document, and that's where going gets tough because you're actually, there are winners and losers, and everybody wants to get a piece of the pie, and so my job's fairly easy. I just have to say, oh, come on in, 11 billion, 12 billion, 13 billion, help yourselves. But the next time around, in 2015, when we start that narrowing process, that's when you'll see people coming to the table, and they're going to want a piece of this imaginary birthday cake that doesn't even exist, but they want to get on the list. They want their project on the list. So that's going to be a big challenge. You will be able to see the draft countywide plan. We're going to post volume 1 on the authority website. The action plans and the CTPL are already up there, but we're going to post the first draft of volume 1 probably in a couple of weeks, and it's going to go to our technical coordinating committee. We had a meeting of staff from around the county this morning, the CTP task force, and they are reviewing the very first draft of the plan, and they're going to give us some comments, and then we will have a document posted and we will, Diane, if you'd make a note, we will shoot you an email so that you can start to see how this thing's shaping up when we post it on the web. The document is still not public. It will become public as soon as we send it out to the Technical Coordinating Committee for review. So that's where we are, and I'll finish up now and ask if you have any questions.
Martin, I've got a couple of questions. Why isn't like Contra Costa Boulevard, North Main, a route of regional significance? You know, all the way through Pacheco, Concord, well, I guess most of it's Pleasant Hill, into Walnut Creek and stuff. It's not on the maps that way, or at least the map we had here.
Well, it's
Because it's parallel by
according to
680.
this it is.
Oh, okay.
But it ends at the 680 North Main
Okay.
interchange, and it doesn't go through downtown Walnut Creek because at that point, what Walnut Creek says is, I should talk into the mic. Too many people have the mics on. So, Concord Boulevard, North Main is a route of regional significance from Martinez all the way down to through Pleasant Hill, all the way down to 680 North Main, and from that point on south into Walnut Creek. The city of Walnut Creek wants North Main to be under their jurisdiction, and they want to address the traffic problems. They want to handle how North Main works in the downtown CBD, and so for that reason, the route is only subject to the multi-jurisdictional planning process at Transpac north of North Main. It picks up again to the south where Danville Boulevard is a route of regional significance.
My second question is, now that the metering lights have been put on for Highway 4, I'm always curious, how much monitoring of the backups goes on? The reason I'm asking, every time I go up Willow Pass at rush hour evening, I see 25 to 50 cars in the double lanes at Port Chicago trying to get onto Highway 4. And I'm there at least once a week, every week. And it's always the same pattern. And it's the only one I've ever seen backed up that much. So I was just curious on what monitoring of the metering lights and their effect.
Well, if you're seeing long queues at the ramps, that's actually a positive sign that it's working. The people waiting in the ramps probably don't appreciate that, but the biggest issue with our ramp metering, attempts at ramp metering in Contra Costa have been the ramps are too short, they're not wide enough, and you really can't store a lot of vehicles. But I think at that location in Port Chicago, there's a lot of storage area, and so they are stacking them up there. And they're released at a certain rate, hopefully at a slow enough rate so that the freeway doesn't back up. We are, regarding monitoring, we are doing before-after monitoring. It's an ongoing effort, and what we've seen so far is in the westbound direction, the monitoring on Highway 4 has been improving the flow on Highway 4. That's the good news. The bad news is that all these cars are getting down 242 and 680 quicker, and so in some respects the queue is simply moved to the south, to the west and to the south. So, you know, traffic jams are difficult to solve. You solve them in one place, they move to another.
Question?
I have some question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, about, I haven't noticed you being concerned about goods movement so much before, but I see a lot of people are more interested in what's coming to our shores on ship or by railroad. And the things I hear are tremendous. We have to be concerned about coal coming from Wyoming into our Bay Area to be shipped to the east, I guess, mostly, is on their way to be exported. But coming through the county, their cars are not covered. So the activity of movement allows stuff to get into the air, and it's including coal. And then they add to it a residue from the refineries, which becomes something like a coke, and it too is not covered. And activity of movement allows it to get into the air. And I would think maybe the Bay Area Air Quality District would be a source of some information about that. But I used to think most everything coming into our area came by A80 or 580, you know. But I think we have to be more concerned about ships and railroads, because we already know that petroleum is coming in to be refined, or crude oil, I should say. So I think this is a new area to be aware of. I'm glad you have it on the list. I don't know what you thought you were going to be getting into there.
I could comment on that. I will say the concerns and issues regarding freight movement have kind of come more to the forefront. They've always been there in one way or another, but now they're getting more recognition. I think part of that is that the Bay region as a whole is starting to bring freight more into the countywide, into the regional transportation plan. Our executive director, Randy Iwasaki, now serves on the National Freight Advisory Committee, and Ross Chittenden serves on the Alameda Freight Advisory Committee, which is doing a study along with MTC, and we're included in that as well. And there are a lot of conflicts with freight movement and, you know, where people live and how they get around. And there's been, of course, some media attention to the increased dangers of moving certain kinds of freight through neighborhoods. So it is getting a closer inspection, and we are more involved with it this time around than we were in the past. There will be at the authority meeting this month, if you're interested, at the June meeting, third Wednesday of June, which I think is the 18th or 19th, 18th. We will have a presentation of the authority on the regional freight study that's underway. And that's also connected with the Northern Waterfront Revitalization Project that the county is hosting. So keep your eyes on freight. More to come.
Question?
One final question, Martin. In reference to the public hearing, would you rephrase that particular date you mentioned?
I didn't mention a public
Oh, you mentioned a public hearing? Oh, okay. Regarding the $11 billion? No,
I didn't.
No public hearing? Okay. All right. No problem. Thanks.
I had a question about the two issues. You didn't mention in your summary of modes, ferry boats or any water travel. I would think long distance, that might be something to consider. The other issue I wanted to mention was the Buchanan Field is well used, and I guess Byron is now getting used. Has any looked at the aviation needs as how they might impact central points or attractive points for more transportation issues? Buchanan Field is getting busier and busier, I think. Sounds like it. I just raised that issue as two things to think about.
I can comment on those as well if you'd like. Is that good, Mr. Chairman? Regarding the ferry boats, there's a lot of interest in ferries. The ferry service came and it went. It was discontinued. They're trying to reinstate it. There's interest in ferries to the north in Hercules. Even Martinez and Antioch have voiced interest in ferry service. The big issue has been funding, and it's really not a moneymaker. It requires a big subsidy to run a ferry service. We now, just this very minute, we're bringing up what's called a WETA study, the Water Emergency Transportation Authority, which oversees all the ferries. We've done a study for Contra Costa and the feasibility of various proposed ferry services, including Antioch, are evaluated in this study, and that's coming to the Planning Committee and the Authority in June. So again, you're welcome to come to to either of those meetings to hear about that. And so that's the marine aspect. And then from the aviation aspect, Buchanan Field, it's probably not going to become a transportation hub anytime in the future. It's going to remain a private, general aviation airport. There has been talk about expanding the Byron Airport in East County, but that has some issues as well in terms of runway length and crosswinds and terrain. A lot of pilots don't like to land at Byron Airport because of the terrain issues or take off. But part of this 239 corridor study is to look at improving the potential and the opportunity for economic development around Byron Airport. If there is an airport that would ever grow, I think that's the one that's has the best possibilities, simply because it's fairly remote, and you could have like a free trade zone there and all kinds of stuff. But the issue is money, and investment.
I have a question. Martin, that $14 billion, is that present value money or future value money?
That's present value money.
So that'll be a lot more down the road.
Year of expenditure depends when you spend it.
Mm-hmm. And also, I didn't hear anything regarding County Connection and are they players in this game as far as bus routes?
Yeah, they're primarily included in our programs, where we have a program for running the buses, the regular buses, and the express buses, so they're in the CTPL, but more on the program side than on the capital side.
And they're talking about extending their services?
County Connection? Mm-hmm. I have not been apprised of that.
Okay.
I heard they were cutting them.
I think that's what I was told, yeah. Okay, thanks.
The bus route to my house is being cut, so I know that they're cutting. Yeah.
Martin, I'm going to be embarrassed, I'm sure, when you answer this question, but looking under the last entry under project, when I see the three letters TLC, I think of only one thing, but I'm sure that's not what it's meant in this entry. What is that an acronym for?
That's for Transportation for Livable Communities.
Thank you.
And that's investment in transportation projects that are near transit hubs and that promote affordable housing near transit, and that can attract jobs as well. We're in one right here. Yeah.
Martin, I noticed that 227, the action plan summaries, you list them in 5 groupings, which do not exactly correspond to the regional transportation planning committee setup. Is this because this just seems more natural?
Well, I wish I had my map of the regional committees here. But the west, central, and east are quite straightforward. You understand those. It's the SWAT area that's complicated. And so SWAT is comprised of Loma and South County, and South County is Danville and San Ramon. That's the SWAT sub-area. But Danville and San Ramon are connected at the hip to Alameda County, and the Tri-Valley is Danville, San Ramon, Dublin, Pleasanton, and Livermore. And they're actually the biggest sub-area in terms of housing and jobs and growth. Even though they have really good jobs housing balance, they have terrible traffic issues with 580 and 680. So we address South County through TVTC, Tri-Valley Transportation Council.
And that's
We address Loma Linda through a separate plan for Loma Linda. And then SWAT blesses them both and sends them up to the authority. So SWAT actually doesn't do an action plan of its own, but it just takes the Loma Linda and Tri-Valley and joins them together and sends them up the ladder.
And Tri-Valley is also somewhat of a vehicle for cooperation with Alameda County?
Yeah, it's a partnership. The Tri-Valley Council has one elected official from each of the 7 jurisdictions.
Any further questions on the part of committee members?
I was asking if we have adopted a new motto, invest wisely. Is that going to be spread around, repeated? That's great.
That's one of our new goals. Continue to invest wisely.
Well, if there are no further questions, thank you, Martin, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very well.
Okay, pass on to 2.3. I wanted to get this on the agenda so we would have some time to consider it. There was interest on the part of the committee expressed looking further at participation in this effort. And wasn't quite sure how to proceed, whether we wanted to look at a workshop type situation or whether we just wanted to have a brief time to openly discuss what we might do in terms of being more involved in the Safe Routes to School process.
Excuse me, has anybody asked the schools if they have a problem? Has anybody asked the schools, what is your problem? What are your problems? I think that maybe a place to begin is let them sound them out and see what their concerns are, because they may be very different in various areas, and there may not be a cookie cutter or even a recipe plan for master plan to deal with, but they certainly have problems. And I have had occasion recently have to go over to Manor Care Center, and I'm watching kids go along, help me out, that big street. It goes off Pleasant Hill Road, goes up to Ross, goes to Ross.
Olympic Boulevard?
Pardon?
Olympic
Yes.
Boulevard?
Yeah, I see kids on that, and there's some areas where there's sidewalks and some areas where there's 40-mile-an-hour traffic and no separation. And that's not peculiar to there, I just haven't noticed that, but that's common in a lot of areas. And what are their concerns about that? And
Well, I think that was kind of what I was referring to at the last meeting, was that when we had the presentation, there appeared to be the lack of resources on the authorities' part to be able to ferret out what projects need to be necessary. And the thought process I had was that we got members from every jurisdiction here, that I thought it would allow us to be proactive, where we would sort of like come up with, so we would go back to our jurisdictions and ask the schools and the city officials, like, what do they envision, that might be funded by the Safe Schools, Safe was, I forget.
You're right, Safe Routes to School.
May I
Yeah.
make the comment that Brad Beck did a beautiful job in presenting the subject. And the report really covered everything possible about the subject matter. And I guess if we can find a fault, it would be it's idealized rather than more practical, and there's so you might have to look into a prioritization. And I don't know if you have to go back to the schools to get the prioritization in order, but I thought he did a lovely job, and it's a great subject. I hope they can do a lot of it.
Well, I want to continue what I was saying, is that, I think that where I was driving at is that, we can be extension of the authority, that we can actually seek the permission of the authority to actually go interview our local schools and our local jurisdictions to see what projects they envision, and that we can compile a list and present that to the authority, maybe giving our weight for what we consider critical. But it was more to help the authority than it was anything else.
I gave a presentation for this at the last city council meeting in Oakley, and they like the idea of it, but I think they're a little more proactive, and it's going to be up to each individual municipality to do their own thing. And I've seen some very different but horrendous traffic issues like he was talking about. And we have a really bad one at Vintage Parkway where we have to have 2 cops monitor the situation over a period of time during pickup or drop off and retrieval of kids. And there's a lot of young drivers going down a main street. So I think it's a matter of busing and biking to school, education, and a combination of things.
In Orinda, I've been a member of the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee for many years, and probably about half of the concerns expressed by citizens are related to transportation of children to schools. And Orinda has kind of a situation where it was built out at a time when there really wasn't much traffic. Traffic has increased. At the time things were built, a lot of kids biked and walked. Now that's totally changed. Most kids are driven to school, or in the case of high school, they drive themselves. Just from our experience, we tried to actually work with both the Acalanes High School District and the Orinda Union School District to suggest looking at the possibility of staggering some start times so that you wouldn't have kids heading in the same direction to 3 different schools at the same time. Unfortunately, we learned from the school districts that because of union contracts, it's extremely difficult to make any changes to those start or ending times. So, that's just anecdotal, saying this is something that we have looked at in terms of trying to involve the school districts, and we really didn't meet with much success, unfortunately.
Martin, can you say anything about how this is being addressed now by authority staff?
Sure. Well, first of all, the development of our Safe Routes to School needs assessment was by no means done in a vacuum. It was done in close collaboration with the school districts and with the schools. And we have a whole network of people who already work in Safe Routes to Schools in each sub-area. And they are the ones who are able to get together with the superintendent or the principal of a school. And I don't know if you've ever tried, but it's not that easy to get together with the principal of a school. And when you do, they sometimes have things on their mind other than the local traffic. And also, there's a lot of, I'll use the word parochialism, in terms of the school proper, what can be done to help traffic on the school proper versus what can be done around the school, which requires the city to take action. And so you need to have the city and the school working together to solve the traffic issues. We've been in communication with the schools. If you go and ask them, what do you need, a lot of them really don't know what they need because the problem is so big they don't know how to solve it. They don't even know where to begin. and the cost of solving it is so great they can't even imagine solving the problem because it would require millions and millions of dollars. And, they're trying to get a hold of a ream of paper in tough budget times. So it's not always evident what's needed, and also the practical solutions, traffic-wise, are often have a lot of negative impacts for the neighborhood. So Safe Routes to School, when we started, we thought it meant kids walking and bicycling to school, more kids walking and bicycling to school, and getting them out of their parents' car and making sure that they, they get some exercise, they get outdoors. But as we talked to all the communities and all the school districts and all the PTAs, there are a lot of parents that don't want their kids to walk or bike to school. There are a lot of neighborhoods where it's not safe for the kid to walk or bike to school. There's issues of safety. There's issues of bullying, and in some cases, the safest way for a kid to get to school right now is to get in their parents' car and get dropped off on the school proper, and nothing short of that will do. And so we're starting to look more at the traffic itself and how to manage the traffic itself, and there are a number of strategies that can be implemented that don't involve a whole lot of capital investment, just making order out of chaos for one thing. But we're continuing to look at the idea of yellow school buses. Whatever happened to the yellow school buses? Where did they go? Well, they got cut because of budgets. And wouldn't it be nice to bring them back? Well, to bring them back is $55 million a year. We've made the calculation. You need $55 million a year. That's like a whole nother Measure J, practically. We've estimated the infrastructure needs, and that's a staggering number too, $300 million in infrastructure needs for the county. And that's based upon kind of having various project types and extending that over all the various schools based upon the way they look. So right now we're just trying to, similar to the countywide plan, we're trying to get our arms around the issue and the question, and we've accomplished that with that report that Brad gave you last time, and we're going to go ahead and publish that. We'd be delighted if the CAC became more involved. I would caution you against contacting your local principal and interviewing him or her without first making arrangements through authority staff and with the Safe Routes to School coordinators that we already have, because one of the things that we don't want to do is go back and ask them the same question that somebody just asked them 2 weeks ago, because they won't look upon that fondly at all.
Would it be possible to distribute to the committee the names and contact information of these coordinators?
Certainly, we could do that.
If you guys don't mind, I'm always a little shy talking into these things, but I actually ran into some folks from the traffics at I think it was an extravaganza event in Danville, and I was talking to one of the coordinators, and I was really excited because I saw they had a little line item for bike mechanic, would come out to the high school and teach kids how to fix their own bike. And I thought, wow, that's awesome. And she told me that nobody shows up at the high school level, and I was like, well, that's kind of a bummer. And it made me think, well, maybe you need to hit kids a little younger with that, like, I don't know, middle school, maybe teach them about how to use their bike, teach them about the rules of the road, stuff like that. And it got me just kind of thinking that maybe, yeah, we can't fix the traffic problems on the streets around the schools very easily, but there's an educational component that seems very valuable in that. And maybe parents would, I don't know if parents are really making the effort to teach their kids how to lawfully operate their bike on the road, how to be responsible for their own safety and not just assume cars and people are going to see them and stop. So anyways, that's my 2 cents for whatever it is. I would love to get involved. work on that.
One of the places that you could go would be Bike East Bay. But it's formerly the East Bay Bicycle Coalition, now called Bike East Bay. And they, under the auspices of the American Bicycle Coalition, offer regular free trainings. Certainly talk to Bike East Bay. And I had a question in the discussion around Safe Routes to School. At this point, you haven't mentioned the health department. What's the Costa County's health department involvement in this?
Actually the Safe Routes to School coordinator for West County is the Contra Costa County Health Department. They handle all of the programs, and one of their representatives serves on the Safe Routes to School task force.
Since this is a school-related issue, what about the school districts? What input have they had into it? And I know when I was a kid, they didn't offer any health and safety class that addressed bicycling, but we did have driver training. What would be the difficulty in getting the schools to provide a basic bike safety class as opposed to just a voluntary attendance thing?
I've heard that driver's training is coming back in curriculum of high schools. Have you heard that?
I hadn't heard that. The Safe Routes to School coordinators have, I think they've really done everything from getting all the supervisors into one room from all the districts to meeting with the principals individually. And they also have school assemblies where they go out and they teach kids how to cross the street and how to ride a bike and how to wear a helmet. So there's a lot of training going on at that level, and we actually want to expand those programs and hope to find the funding to do it. It is already funded in part through the Contra Costa Transportation Authority's Carpool, Vanpool, and Park and Ride program and our Safe Routes to Children's program, and then also some transportation for clean air funds, TFCA funds are being used for that. So what you've just talked about there, Michael, is actually, it is going on at the schools. I know for a fact it's going on at Central and East. And then there are other programs in West County through the health department. And then La Miranda and Danville and Santa Rosa actually have the Yellow School Bus program, which takes up most of their time and money.
Has the authority identified the areas where bicycling would be dangerous?
Well, we've identified the areas where it would be safer. We've identified one area where we know it's difficult for pedestrian and bicycles to get to a school. That's at the middle school in Walnut Creek, called WCI Walnut Creek Intermediate. And it is north of Ignacio Valley Road in Walnut Creek, and the street that connects to it, all the neighborhoods that connect to it have to go down Walnut Boulevard. And if you drive south on Walnut Boulevard, you'll come to a part where it's essentially 2 lanes, 2-way, narrow lanes, and then a drop off on each side into a creek bed. And the city of Walnut Creek has been wanting to fix that problem for some time, put in sidewalks. The cost of just improving that 1 block stretch is $6 million. So it's not cheap, and it gets into a lot of drainage. The sidewalk part's easy, but building the drainage underneath it so the drainage can still flow is quite expensive. So, I mean, that's kind of an extreme. That's an outlier of a project. We call that an outlier. There are other projects that are much less expensive than that. But we're tracking those kinds of projects. Someday we hope that that can get constructed.
Brad mentioned there'd be matching grants that you'd have to provide something local. Is that one-on-one, or what is the ratio of what has to be matched?
For federal funds, there's a requirement for 11.5% local match to $88. It's 11.5 to $88.5 match.
Well, it's sounding from what I'm hearing that this Safe Routes to School committee seems to be doing their job. They are doing it. My concern was at the last meeting was that there was a void here that we in the CAC might be able to fill, but it sounds like the job is being done. So.
And that doesn't preclude individual members of the committee becoming involved in this area. And that's why I've asked for the dissemination of the coordinators for the various areas so committee members will know who to contact.
And I would expect that we would all go to our city council meetings and ask them what they are doing, or are they doing anything to address the issue.
If we are finished with this topic, I'd like to move on to reports. All committee members have a copy of my notes on the last two authority board meetings. Since I have them written up, I'll just talk in general and ask a question, or try to answer any questions. Kind of the major themes, of course, have been the Countywide Transportation Plan update, and also broadening and putting more flesh on the PDA, investment and growth strategy. And some things were done on these issues, I believe, at both meetings. One item that has come up repeatedly lately has been salary ranges and continuation of benefits for authority personnel. That's still an open issue, and an ad hoc committee has been convened to address it of the authority board. The problem here, as perceived principally by Supervisor Mischoff, who has to, of course, negotiate with all of the county employee unions, is trying to get more uniformity of benefit formulas, even for a separately funded agency like the authority, as they try to go through their negotiation processes with the various employee groups. So this has been, anytime this has come up, there has been more discussion about this in the last few authority board meetings. At this point, the authorities decided to go ahead with the next fiscal year as approve that package, but there will definitely be a ad hoc committee ongoing to look at possibly ways and means to change the percentage splits on medical plans and on retirement plans into something more in tune with the county as a whole. Needless to say, this is a very difficult subject.
Well, I can tell you right now that as a union negotiator myself, that there will be a hard fight to change the retirement benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That unions are reticent to capitulate to pension reform. So that'll be a tough one.
I have a question about that. And does that reform apply to the assembly members and the supervisors? They're looking at that also? Or is this just one-sided?
Well, actually, it's
'Cause
being-
that's
you
not
know,
right.
One of the principal drivers of the discussion is Supervisor Mishoff from the county.
And I understand that, but what I want to know is she in fact saying this is all-encompassing, or is she just looking at one group, which is the unions, and that the assembly members and the supervisors then continue to enjoy their extreme benefits and salaries?
Well, I can't.
Just
answer-
asking.
I can't answer that one.
He's just a reporter.
Okay, well, on May 21st, of course, the legislature is getting into high gear, so there'll be more work by our legislative advocates. There was an Assembly House Resolution 29 regarding outsourcing of public services, and the Authority Board wants to lean back on this one because they feel that they've very effectively used outsourcing in certain areas, to good effect. The other one was what's going to be the annual bill from Senator DeSaulnier. And this year it's called SB 792. And the Authority Board feels that this is totally duplicative of their obligations under existing statute. It would be essentially a make work, and so they're going to oppose that and ask Senator DeSaulnier to just withdraw it or modify it even further, or maybe even hope he gets elected to Congress. A couple of interesting things. Well, one interesting, I guess the last time we met, I talked about the outreach to Google on the part of the authority executive director suggesting Contra Costa County or a city therein as a test bed for Google's self-driving vehicles. And the last meeting, there was, he announced that he has submitted an application to the Department of Transportation. They've got a program going called Connected Vehicles, which is standards for automobiles on the roadway exchanging information with other nearby automobiles as to important things like my brakes just got put on hard, so that the cars can begin to cooperate with each other, or at least warn their drivers. Possibly, react faster than the driver can to a developing situation. So we've made application to have Contra Costa County be a test bed affiliate for this program. So in addition to everything else, the authority is trying to involve itself or involve the county in some of the really long-range projects that are going on. Reviewed a report card on the first iteration of MTC's One Bay Area grant program. What they did find that among the various sub-regions, OBAG grants were really not distributed anywhere near evenly. So they suggested one change, that some raise, I guess, in the relative importance of the criteria for areas that are really contributing a lot to the housing needs, to try to balance that out. And again, this is a ongoing discussion with MTC. So I think that's the highlights. If there are any further questions.
Yeah, wasn't there one more thing? The gas tax was going to change to a usage tax, which would require electronic monitoring, and they were debating on how that could work.
There was some discussion. I think at this point the authority is kind of in a watch status, if I remember. You know, a couple of the authority members are very involved in MTC affairs, and if I understand what I did hear at the meeting, it would probably be proposed as an either or. You know, either you choose to, or maybe there's strict criteria, depending on the kind of car you continue to pay the gasoline tax, or you get some kind of exemption from the gasoline tax for certain kinds of vehicles, and you pay a per mile. They did go to some point to stress that they're not talking about specifically tracking vehicle by vehicle at this point in a really intrusive way. So again, that's a situation that is evolving. And for anyone who doesn't know, you know, a principal source of highway funding has been the gas tax in this state. And as cars have greatly improved their mileage and now more electric vehicles are on the road, or plug-in hybrids with extremely low gasoline consumption for miles traveled, that's going to be a problem on funding the roads. Okay, and the President, just passing on to CAC member staff comments. You have a comment you'd like to make?
I do, and I would like permission to stand at the podium.
Yeah, sure.
So I wanted to bring to the committee's attention that Monday was Memorial Day. And I'm disappointed that on the agenda today, we did not have time to honor our fallen heroes, regardless of whether we believe in this war or not. There have been many, too many young men and women who were killed. Most recently, we're looking at Afghanistan and Iraq. Anybody here a veteran? Thank you for your service. Anyone here a Gold Star family? Gold Star families are families who've lost their child in the war. I am a Gold Star mother. My son Jonathan was killed, my oldest baby. I would like to take this opportunity, with everyone's permission, to read some of the names of our fallen heroes, way too close to home. And I apologize for the cities of Richmond and the cities and other cities where I didn't get their names, I didn't have the opportunity. Major James Aaron, United States Army, Concord, Iraq, July 5th, 2007. Private First Class Scott Burnett, United States Army, Concord, Iraq, January 28th, 2009. Corporal Mick Bifsovsky, United States Marine Corps, Concord, Iraq, September 6, 2004. Specialist James Kuhn, United States Army, Walnut Creek, Iraq, April 4th, 2007. Lance Corporal Joshua Corral, United States Marine Corps, Danville, Afghanistan, November 18th, 2011. Lance Corporal Kyle Crowley, United States Marine Corps, San Ramon, Iraq, April 6, 2004. Staff Sergeant Sean Diamond, United States Army, Dublin, Iraq, February 15, 2009. Sergeant Gabriel Guzman, United States Army, Concord, Afghanistan, March 8, 2008. Captain John Hallett, United States Army, Concord, Afghanistan, August 25, 2009. Lance Corporal Eric Hodges, United States Marine Corps, San Ramon and Concord, Iraq, November 10, 2004. Sergeant Ryan Hopkins, United States Army, Livermore, Iraq, January 8, 2010. Corporal Sean Langevin, United States Army, Walnut Creek, Iraq, November 9, 2007. Specialist Jameson Linskoff, United States Army, Pleasanton, Afghanistan, March 29, 2011. Major Evan Molosky, United States Army, Danville, Afghanistan, January 12, 2011. Captain Mark Payne, United States Army, Lafayette, Iraq, October 15, 2006. Private First Class Benjamin Tollefson, United States Army, Concord, Iraq, December 31st, 2008. Senior Airman Jonathan Antonio Vega Yelner, United States Air Force, Lafayette, Afghanistan, April 29, 2008. Private First Class Benjamin Safsky, United States Army, Concord, Iraq, May 3rd, 2006. We actually honored a fallen hero from Danville. His mother had never been honored before. She received the telegram and then was forgotten. Private Dean Vasquez, United States Marine Corps, Danville, Vietnam, May 12, 1968. These are the names that I have as of May 2014, and unfortunately, there will be more. But I hope that for Memorial Day, and certainly Veterans Day that's coming, that we remember those guys who fought in Vietnam. They were sent there. They didn't want to go. They were sent there. They were forced to go. And they went. And then we came back and didn't even acknowledge them. We owe them an apology. We owe them recognition. And I hope all of you go back to your respective towns and ensure that they are remembered. And for the others, they weren't enlisted. They wanted to go of their own free will, reminding me of this, that freedom is not free. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. We're a little over. Is there anyone have any urgent requests for future agenda items? If not, I'd like to declare us adjourned in honor of the people that have just been commemorated for Memorial Day.
You know,